Space and Wilson.
Darcy. I wrote this in 1997, which was the 25th birthday of the Space. I gave it to Percy. I sent it to Percy. And I said, would you read this? I don't know if it was read or not, but I thought that maybe I should read it now. In the 1970s were the most exciting and dangerous years I've ever spent in the theatre. For me, it all started in 1971 with Orestes. I was a young actor at the very beginning of my career, working and keeping company with what I can only term as giants in the theatre. The country was politically on the boil, and there were writers, directors, actors, and people in the performing and visual arts that desperately needed an alternative space to work. To do things like Orestes, what one would term experimental theatre, but it went beyond that, let me assure you. It could not be a government-subsidised theatre because that was the problem. The fact that our big theatres were subsidised by the government, and they called the shots. They said who should watch the plays and who should be in the plays. The people, it had to be for the people, and it had to be by the people and for the people. You could not have an audience anymore that was Snow White. It just did not work. It was morally wrong. It had to be stopped. And the Space was kind of the beginning of that. Brian Asprey, with the help of a great many wonderful and committed people, there were so many people involved in the Space. One hears particular names, famous names, but there were so many people. The cleaners, I can remember the cleaners. They were extraordinary women. There were people that worked for absolute nothing, and they did menial jobs, but important jobs, and they were lovely people, committed people. They found the Space. I knew I wanted to work there. I wanted the challenges I knew the Space had to offer me. I wanted to be part of that process that could, in some small way, contribute to something positive in the theatre. And most importantly, the Space had an enormous effect on theatre in this country, not just Cape Town, but everywhere. Everybody knew about the Space and what the Space was doing and the people that were working there. But it influenced the politics in this country. It had to. Because what they were doing was they were flaunting the laws. You have to have segregated audiences. A white actor and a black actor are not allowed to appear together on the stage. And they were doing that. And that became known. But I needed the Space. I realize now that I needed the Space a hell of a lot more than they needed me. It gave me life as an actor and dignity as a human being. But there was somebody who needed and wanted and deserved the Space more than all of us put together. She was the soul of the Space. And without her, there never would have been the Space. It just wouldn't have existed. It just wouldn't have worked. I can remember her auburn hair, her flowing gowns. I can hear her laugh. She had an extraordinary laugh. She had an extraordinary presence. Yvonne Bryceland, for me, was the Space. I come from a very English, liberal background, English mother, English father. And my father would sit at the head of the table and shake his head and say, what's happening here is not right. Do you understand it's not right? And me as a young man, as a teenager, would say, well, we have to do something about it. And he would say, well, what do you suggest? He said, it's the ballot. You have to vote against the system. That's the only way to do it. And I said, but surely there's something more radical that one can do. And he said, don't talk like that. In other words, I was talking about bombs and guns and things like that. So when the Space happened, and I was an actor, and I was asked to do really important work that made a political, constructive statement. It was wonderful for me. It was my gun. It was my bomb. And it made me feel as if I was really achieving something as a human being. And it was, I was so grateful for that. My relationship with black people as a young man was the people that worked with us, and I loved them and they loved me, but that's as far as it went. I went to a school exclusively white. Everything about my upbringing was governed by apartheid, governed by the system. I met Fugard. I knew that things weren't right, but he made me really care about the situation here. He made me aware in a different kind of a way. I was totally aware of it before, but he focused me on what was happening here in a very unique manner. Yeah, Orestes wouldn't have happened if John Harris hadn't done what he did. I felt liberated as a young actor. I felt free as a young actor. I felt as if I was doing something that was really worthwhile. I was living in dangerous times, and I was doing something that was really dangerous. I can assure you, when we were doing Orestes, there was a point where there was a man parked outside my apartment, and I started to greet him after a while. He was watching me. I loved that. I wasn't threatened by that. I just loved it. Maybe it was because of my youth and because of my chutzpah, but I loved that feeling. It made me feel good. I wasn't threatened by it at all. The fact that I was working with these marvelous people that I think were also watched by security police made me feel so good. I cannot tell you. I think Athol was 38 when I worked with him, and I was in my early 20s, I think. Yeah, well, I understood that immediately. I picked up the Sunday papers and I read it. I knew exactly what it was about. And then I thought, hell, I hope they don't get him. And they caught him within hours. They caught him within hours. The way I remember it, I might be wrong. And my feeling was, oh, what a shame. I wish he'd got away with this. Because I felt that things like that needed to be done. But my father was saying, hey, don't give me that. You'll get yourself into trouble. You know, you must kind of understand that I played John Harris. Orestes is about John Harris. So say no more. You know, that was wonderful for me. I'll never forget that. I got a phone call from Peter Curtis, who was head of KPAB, the government-subsidized theatre, and he said, we're going to do something experimental with Athol Fugard. And I said, with Athol Fugard? He had just done Busman and Lena. He had just done The Island and Says Where Bosley hadn't divided, but I'd just seen Athol and Yvonne in Busman and Lena, and I think people are living there. And he said, Fugard wants to speak to you, he wants to audition you. And I said, where? He said, the Labia Theatre upstairs. And I can remember climbing those stairs, and there he was, this man with this beard. And I can absolutely remember that my pulse rate went right up, and I thought, now what is he going to? He's going to ask me to do an extract from Shakespeare. What is it? Should I prepared something? And he just said, sit down. And I sat down, and he spoke to me for half an hour, and he asked me about stuff, not significant, important, certainly not political. And we just chatted, and he said, right, cheers, it was nice meeting you. And I left that place, and and the next day I got a phone call and said, Fugard will work with you. And that was a big moment. And not only that, it was Yvonne as well. So there I was in this kind of magic circle. Well, she was already in the group. She'd already worked with Athol. I think they'd already done People Are Living, and of course they'd done Busman and Lena. The first time I met Yvonne, I've written it down here, was the first time I met Brian and Yvonne was in 1967, which was years before The Space. That's 4 or 5 years before The Space. And I met Brian as a photographer. I was doing a production at the Little Theatre, Little Malcolm and His Struggle Against the Eunuchs, and Mavis Taylor, who was directing the production, said, listen, tonight at your dress rehearsal, Brian Asprey is going to come and take some photographs. And I'd been in a few plays before that, and I knew the guy kind of came to the foot of the stage, went click, click, and then he went home. Well, we started the run-through, and Mavis said, listen, we want a run-through without any breaks here. We pretend there's an audience. And there Brian was on the stage, and the camera was click here and click there. And not only that, he was laughing at the jokes. So he kind of became part of the production. He was a distraction, a serious distraction. I had to focus really very carefully to get through it. And I thought, who is this bizarre? He was a large man with a wonderful kind of, a unique kind of a laugh. And he would laugh in the middle of a sentence. And there was Yvonne sitting in the front row, and with this almost this kind of gurgle. Well, how would you describe her laugh? Deep. And by the end of the evening, we knew that our play was going to be successful. And we kind of judged it by their response. So that's how I met them for the very, very first time. She was in a production, I think, of Peter Pan. at some point, which later on I also did with her. I played Gentleman Starkey, and she was the lady, Mrs. Darling, is it, in Peter Pan. And then we did a production of Tango, which Fugard watched. Morozek wrote a Tango. I played Arthur in Tango, and she played it. She was a wonderful character actress, and she played this little old lady. And Yvonne had very tiny feet, and she wore these enormous tackies. And at one point in the production, I had to kneel at her feet and talk to her. And I looked down and I saw the tackies. Now, I'm not a corpse. I don't laugh on stage. I don't believe in it. And Fugard, you don't go there with Fugard. That's just, you don't do. And he was watching. And I looked down at Yvonne's tackies, and she looked at me, and we both went for a moment. We stopped the play for a few minutes, which wasn't cool. Because the day or two after that, we started working on Orestes. Serious stuff. That's where I kind of first started connecting with Yvonne, was there. And then after that, I think after that, Orestes happened, immediately after that, which was in 71. Listen, we created Orestes through improvisation. But when I talk about improvisation, I mean, Fugard would spend hours setting up an improvisation. He wouldn't just say, no, I want you to do this and that. He would spend hours and hours talking about it. And then 2/3 of the rehearsal maybe talking about what he wanted us to investigate. And then we would improvise. And he would he called himself the scribe. He was the scribe. And we were he would write down what we gave him that he thought was of any significance in terms of the project. When we started the project, he spoke about John Harris. And I knew about John Harris. But then at the same time, he spoke about a whole bunch of other things, which enriched me enormously as an actor. He spoke about poor theatre and the definition of poor theatre. He spoke about Peter Brook. He spoke about things that at that point I'd read Stanislavski and other kind of theatre books, shall I say mundane in a sense, maybe out of date. And he started introducing me. Later on, we spoke about Grotowski, and I started reading Grotowski. So it wasn't, he just opened up a world for me that was quite extraordinary. It was almost as if I hadn't properly been born as an actor when I met him. And he had a kind of a respect. He had a profound, that was one of his terms. He said, you must understand, I have a profound respect for actors. Now, what he meant by that was he understood actors. He understands actors. But in terms of respect, there's a point where you have to define what is respect, because he asked a lot of actors. And sometimes one questioned if that was properly respectful or not. And when I think back on it, absolutely, he had the right to ask anything of me or anything of any other actor. If you resisted that, then you shouldn't work with him, and I never did resist him. Not because I was afraid to resist him, because I simply didn't want to, because I wanted to investigate with him. He kind of used us, in a sense, to write his play. That's how Sizwe Banzi and the Island happened. He worked with the actors. The actors kind of gave him his story, and he shaped his story. But without Fugard, there would never have been a Sizwe Banzi. There would never have been an Island. There would never have been an Orestes. Although, in a sense, Orestes was our story, and I contributed to that story. But I deserve a little bit of credit, but not a lot of credit. No, of course I was reading Greek mythology at the same time, and there were news cuttings about it. I was doing all that homework stuff. But you know, if you want to ask me how I was feeling as an actor when I was doing Orestes, I felt lonely, in a sense. I felt that I was being asked to do something that was very special, but in a way I wasn't sure that I was properly equipped. I had just come out of university. I was terribly inexperienced, and I was working with, as I said earlier, I was working with people, enormous people. He'd written some incredible plays. I knew that I was dealing with, as I said, a giant in the theatre, and in a sense I had to be very careful of that. I felt at the time, and so I used to go home and very often think, what was today about? I'm not sure that I'm up to this, but there's always tomorrow. I'll try and all I tried to do with Few God was just to open myself up. And the end, I know that that's all that he wanted. He wanted nothing more, and he wanted nothing less than that. He once asked me about my relationship with my mother, and I was desperately fond of my mother. And then he spoke, he said, could you kill your mother? And I thought, man, that's a hell of a question to ask me. No, I couldn't kill my mother. I love my mother. And he was asking that because he was getting at something else. And so it put me into a sense of confusion. You speak about truth. I know that we spent hours trying to define what truth is. Truth finished, klar. Truth between you and me now. Am I telling the truth? Are you asking me truthful questions? Life being truth. And what is truth? And truth, in the end, I think, and I'm going back virtually 50 years, in the end we decided truth is when you take something that is wrapped and cared for, you take all that stuff away and you leave it bare and you leave it naked. That is the truth. There are no excuses. There are no explanations for anything. It's just there by itself. That is truth. Does that make sense to you? Because it made sense to me at the time. Truth is nakedness. If I'm going to look at you truthfully, then I have to remove everything. I have to remove your beard. I have to remove your clothes. And I have to look at you with no clothes. Of course. Yeah, absolutely. I became very sympathetic to the cause, to the South African dilemma. But at the same time, I didn't want to just be a white liberal. I felt as if I wanted to be something more than that. And doing Orestes and investigating the motives, the reason why that bomb was placed, although it caused chaos, I became very close to what that was really about. Which was a wonderful thing for me because it's always stayed with me. Well, I suppose that also is what Orestes was about, that they should witness it and they should ask themselves some very serious questions. No, Brian Asprey was there all the time and watching. You see, Brian he has an understanding of the theatre. And a good theatre photographer has to have an understanding of the theatre. So he understands the camera and he understands the actor. And so the photographs that he took, I've got one photograph of myself, I don't know where it is now, is a study in concentration, a study in focus. And it's very clear that I do not know that photograph has been taken. And those are the brilliant theatre photographs that exist. And those are the photographs that Brian took of Orestes. There's a multitude of them. They are real photographs. They are actually his photographs, in a sense, were what Orestes was about. Nothing theatrical about it at all. On the other hand, so real that it becomes totally theatrical. You know, there was a moment in Orestes. Every night, Athol would give Yvonne a chair. And the chair was Agamemnon, and she was Clytemnestra, and she had to deal with the chair. She never saw the chair before the performance, and he chose the chair every night. It would be placed on the stage and we would start working. And on one particular night, the chair retaliated. Agamemnon retaliated, and a big splinter of wood came out and sliced Yvonne's forehead down the side. The blood oozed into her hair. The blood oozed into her clothes. And I lifted my head and I just saw this spectacle almost. It's better theatre you cannot get than that. Fugard then got up and he had a tissue or a hanky in his hand and he walked up to Yvonne and he just dabbed her a little bit. And then he left and she had to deal with it. And she did. That was a magnificent theatrical moment that I will never forget. You know, there are actors that I spoke to afterwards that saw it and they said, really, Wilson, I don't know what you're doing, man. But this is really weird stuff. A lot of people simply did not understand it. They didn't know what it was about. And my fellow actors, a lot of them, to this day, don't know what Fugod's about. And a lot of the audience, I think, felt the same way. But they had to know when they left that they'd seen something unique, that they'd seen something special, like it or not. We had put them through something, and that's all we wanted to do. That they went the next day and said, "Oh, you've got to go and see Orestes," I'm not sure. They might have said just the opposite. I don't care. He worked in metaphors. They understood the metaphor. When we did Orestes, because the talk always was, this is the sort of theatre that we want to do, this is important theatre, but we need a space to do it. And there wasn't a space, literally a space. There wasn't that space. And I knew when we were doing Orestes that they were looking for that space. And when I went overseas to study, they'd found the space. And I was asked to be part of that space, and for a while I couldn't be. When I came back from London, I went straight back to those people. And I said, I want to work in this space with you. I don't think I properly did that. I think when I was in London, I was so absorbed by what I was doing there that in a sense I forgot about this place. And only when I came back and started associating with Fugod again was I made terrifyingly aware of what was happening, and it was getting worse. Now we're heading for 1976, right? I knew that they were doing statements. Athol said, "I want you to do statements." And I said, "I can't. I've got to go overseas. I've been given a bursary. I've got to leave you for a year." And he said, "Right, go. We'll see you when you get back." And that's when I went and saw him, and he looked at my face and he said, "Oh, there are a couple of harmless scars. In other words, you haven't grown much over there. You would have grown more here." And he was probably right. Don't get on a London tube and learn. Get on a train here and go between Cape Town and Simonstown. You'll learn a hell of a lot more. When into the space, the place, it was kind of a dark, in a sense you could kind of describe it as quite dingy. But I walked in there, and I must say, I just felt, I just felt like I was in the right place at the right time, and I was perfectly at home. I think my first production there was something like The Glass Menagerie, and with Yvonne playing the mother, and magnificently, she was wonderful. And there were lots of other productions, I've got a list of them here, that weren't politically orientated or connected in any kind of a way. They were just wonderful productions, and there were wonderful people there. I can think of Bill Tanner was one of the directors, and I think he directed Glass Menagerie. He was just the most marvelous young, clever director, and he wanted to work at the space. The Cape was just over the road. They were looking for good actors. They were looking for good directors. It was a choice that you made as an individual. Some of my friends did the Cape route. I did the space route. If I look back at it, I am so grateful that is the journey that I wanted to take at the time. Oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. There's no question. I was at the first performance of Sizwe Banzi, which I think was a Sunday night at the space, and it was capacity. I have to say, white liberals, rich white people from Sea Point. That theatre was full, but there was such an atmosphere in that theatre. We knew that we were going to witness something special, and gosh, was it special. To see Winston Chawner, what a magnificent actor he is, John Carney, as young, and the energy that they kind of introduced me to as a whitey actor, that I was able to witness. The energy that night was quite remarkable. No, the space was a special place, and the people out there knew about it, and people wanted to go there. Totally unique, totally new, Totally different. A different energy that I'm not sure that the English or the American actor can conjure up. They haven't got that energy. They don't come from this space. This place has the energy. This is the most wonderful place for an actor. South Africa, at the moment, forget about the 70s. At the moment, what's happening in this country is dangerous, let me tell you something. And, you know, Fugard was there to take note of what was happening politically. Those people need to be here now as well, because things have changed, and they've changed for the better in many, many ways, but they've also changed terribly for the worse. And the theatre needs to be vigilant. The theatre always needs to be vigilant. It was vigilant then, it needs to be vigilant now, and in 50 years' time, the theatre needs to be vigilant. We will always need the Athol Fugards and the Yvonne Brysons of this world. They will never go, we will always need them. Maybe not, but the time will come when we have to do that. And it'll be just as dangerous. Let me tell you, it'll be just as risky in the new South Africa. Just as dangerous. But I can't think now of somebody that's really taking on the system that we are having to endure at the moment, which is outrageous. There's no apartheid, there's no segregation, but there are other things that are terrifying, and the theatre needs to take on those things. The theatre needs to be a lot more vigilant than it is at the moment. But there's the talent, and there's also Afrikaans theatre in this country. And Afrikaans theatre in this country is alive and well, and there's some magnificent young talent. But you've got to take that talent, and like a Fugard, you've got to point it in the right direction. Probably was, because it was apartheid, you know. That's just but the enemy is clear at the moment too. It's very clear what the enemy is at the moment too. But you have to watch it in a different kind of a way, because it's a different enemy. South Africa is a much better place than it was. I'm not saying that, oh, apartheid, thank heavens apartheid is gone. There is a chance to have a different kind of a society, but the headspace has got to be different to create that different society. It's wrong at the moment. And the theatre can fix a lot of that. I watched The Island sitting in the Royal Court Theatre with Athol. And I was part of the South African season. There was Sizwe Banzi, The Island, and Statements. And it was a South African season. I can't remember how it worked. Maybe it was a week Sizwe Banzi, then a week The Island, and then a week Statements. I can't remember. It might have been a night on or a night, I can't remember. But I was part of that season. And I sat and watched The Island sitting in the Royal Court Theatre with Athol next to me. At the end of that, he turned to me and he said, you know, you're a South African. I said, yes. He said, South Africans have a different response to the island than the British do. There were areas of the island that I was quite amused by. Not in a racist way, but there were things that amused me about the island, whereas other people, maybe from another country away from South, saw that differently and weren't amused by it. Something else I have to talk about while I remember is humour, in terms of Athol wasn't all serious. Yvonne had the most wonderful sense of humour. Brian has the most wonderful sense of it. And Fugard, a keen, sharp sense of humour. And I've always believed myself that a relationship survives sometimes because of humour. Humour is such an important ingredient in life, and humour is such an important ingredient in the theatre. It's vital. For me, that's the finest theatre, to mix the two, and to surprise your audience, to make your audience laugh, and then say, "Wag 'n bietjie, wait. It's not that funny, my friend. Listen to this," and then to make them cry. If you can do those two things, then I believe you have, in a sense, a pure theatre, because theatre needs to do both. Theatre can't be all serious and all laugh. It needs to mix the two together. And if you can get a writer that does that, there are lots of actors that will meet the challenge. Walter Donahue, an English, I don't know where Walter is now, an English director, directed Occupations, as I remember. And at the same time, we did a new play, which is very well known, certainly in South Africa. It's a little lunchtime play called Bar and Jer. And I also did that we played brother and sister, Yvonne and I. That all happened at the same time. Yeah, there were awards, and as a young actor, I was winning those awards. But in a funny kind of a way, when I went to, I can remember it I was slightly hurt by it. When Occupations happened, and I went off to the awards, and I came back, and Yvonne said, "Who won?" And I said, "I did." And she went, "Oh." Because there was a black actor from the space that was nominated in the same category, and I'd won it, and she I think had hoped that the black actor would win it. And I found that's a little bit hurtful, but at the same time I understand why. In a way, I also wanted the black actor to win. I didn't want to win, but I won, and there's nothing I could do about it. It was a written play, but he changed it all the time. And I can remember Athol saying to me all the time, he said, "Listen, for you to get Daniela," I think the character was called Danielo, "for you to get Daniela right," he says, "you have to live dangerously as an actor." He says, "All actors need to live dangerously." And he said, "You're not living dangerously at the moment, you're being too careful." And I try to live dangerously. I felt that Demitos in the end didn't work. And why it didn't work, I don't know. If I was contributing to that, I don't know. But in the end, I wasn't happy with Demitos. It was the one time that I wasn't properly happy working with Fugard, because I felt as if I wasn't doing what Fugard was asking me to do. And you always wanted to not make him happy, but you wanted to feel as if you had extended yourself to an extent where he could say, "Right, what you've done is honest and true." I wasn't threatened in any kind of a way. I really wasn't. I felt liberated by the pressure. I felt freed by the pressure. I enjoyed the pressure. I felt as if I was fulfilling a very important function, role, not only in the theatre, but I can remember we used to, on one occasion, there was a rap party for another production, and Yvonne and Athol and myself went. And then another actor came up to me and he said, you three guys, and Val Donnell, she was part of Orestes. He said, you have a kind of an aura about you, which we weren't aware of. But it's almost as if you've made yourself special. And I didn't feel special. I felt as if I was just being with special people, doing special work. But I didn't feel special. And I think people that looked at us from the outside saw us as being quite a special little group. And I suppose when I look back at it, maybe we were. The space was a very special place. There's no question. And a lot of people wanted to work there and didn't get to work there because they maybe didn't have the credentials. I don't know what the credentials were. I just know that I just arrived there and I found myself completely and utterly welcomed and at home. Oh, absolutely. You were very aware. There were many productions at the space that never happened. They got cancelled at the last moment because of censorship. Censorship was something that you were totally aware of all the time in the theatre. I can remember doing a restoration, 18th century, a play, I don't know, it was Stoops to Conquer or something, and the word whore had to be spoken, had to be said on it. And they said, "No, you can't say whore." And it was taken out of the play. Censorship in this country was terrifying. You cannot believe how scary it was. So you knew that I wasn't personally threatened, but I knew that at any point, the guy parked outside my flat, which I spoke, that's censorship. He was watching me because I was involved with these intellectual liberals. I don't know how they saw us. But that was censorship. They watched us all the time. You just couldn't say and do as you pleased. Otherwise, you could land in big trouble. Finished and klar. Not until you go there properly. Yes, no, there certainly was. There was a moment, you switch on the telly, and it's different. There wasn't any telly here until, I think, the mid-70s. Can you believe that? that was part of censorship. No, you can't have it. It's going to corrupt the minds of the folk. You can't have television. And they fought that for years. Now, I was very aware when I went to London the first time, and when I went to America the first time, it's a different planet. At one point, we toured statements, and we ended up in Yugoslavia. And I was walking down the street in Yugoslavia with Yvonne, and there was this beautiful long auburn hair, free, and this dress, this flowing dress. And honestly, the people stopped in the street, and they gaped at her. They hadn't seen anything like it. That was Yugoslavia, which was, in a sense, further behind South Africa. But South Africa, in terms of America and England, a different planet, especially then. Now I don't know. You know, I realized it as you've described it, but I wasn't put down by it. And there was a point where I thought very seriously about working as an actor in England and America. There was a point where I worked there for a year. And I actually at one point did an audition for the RSC. Trevor Nunn was at the space, and I think Brian or Yvonne or Ethel organised an audition with me and Trevor Nunn in the Space Theatre. And I auditioned with Trevor Nunn for 3 hours. And at the end of that, he said, listen, he said, I'll give you a contract. You get your papers. He says, I'm not going to be responsible. You get your papers right. He said, you come and work for the company. But he says, you might carry a spear for 3 years, whereas you're playing important parts. And I seriously thought about that. Then I went to London afterwards as well, and I worked there a little bit. And of course, there were statements. I spent time doing statements. But there was a point where I wanted to come back to this country. There was a point where I didn't want to live in England or America, because I wasn't English. I wasn't American. I was South African. And an actor has to be able to relate to his audience. An actor has to know what an audience laughs at. And I'm sorry, but there's a distinct difference between a South African audience and an English audience. The English humor and the South African humor is very different, and the American humor is very different audiences. And I felt as if I understood this place, and especially because of my relationship with Fugard and the space, I felt I understood. I felt I understood it a lot better than perhaps a lot of actors did, and I wanted to be back in this place. No, we got paid rubbish, but it was great. It was great. It was nice being a poor actor. How could I explain that? It was just nice being a poor actor. I had a Volkswagen Beetle. I stayed in a flat in Sea Point. I think I earned 40 rands a week. On one occasion, I was brought back to the space to do a production. I was living in Joburg, and they brought me to do a production. And they put my salary up from 40 to 60 bucks a week. Hey. That wasn't good, because the other actors got to hear about this, and they didn't like that. 60 bucks, the Performing Arts Councils were 3-4 times that amount. So no, the bucks, I'm sorry, not important. They're important now, but not then. Not properly at the space. And I never properly took, I really got to know Peter at university. And I didn't properly take him seriously until I saw one of his shows. And I understood that he was absolutely unique and perfectly marvelous at what he was doing, and that he was going to become very, very well known. But can I tell you that I didn't properly take him seriously until I actually saw one of his shows. And I wasn't properly aware of him at the space. I know that he was writing plays. I went and saw some of his plays. I know he lived in a little room somewhere there in Long Street, which I think he kind of enjoyed being the poor writer as well. And I knew him, I liked him. But it was at university, he was kind of a year ahead of me, that he was so good to me and so warm. But I only took him seriously as a performer when I saw him up on the stage and I saw what he could do. Invigorating, enormously invigorating, very special time, unique time, and moments in that time that I can remember and will never ever forget. For me, the most important moments for me in the theatre were when I went to university, and that young energy and the fact that you were going to start something that you wanted to do, and then my time at the Space. There were difficult times for the theatre. In terms of the country, the 70s, the country was in turmoil, but in the 80s, the country literally was almost burning. And when I think back, I would have thought that the 80s things were calming down, but the things were really rough in South Africa in the 80s.
But you didn't feel it so much in the Space, in that middle?
No, I didn't. No. Because I wasn't there all the time. I was all over the place. I've always been a freelance actor. I've never had a contract for longer than 1 or 2 productions, and so I wouldn't have been there all the time. Bea Berman could probably tell you more about that. That's somebody else I'd like to mention. She was backstage. She wasn't visual. She wasn't up front. But what a marvelous woman that was, and her input was. And there were so many like her. You can't hardly remember the face or the name, but the contribution was overwhelming to that Space. And that Space needed those sort of people. There were rich people that gave the Space money. Very important for the success of a place like that. Brian's a lot tougher than you think he is. There's a tough side to Brian. I witnessed it once, and it was with Occupations. I walked into the theatre, and their billboard was up there, and I've never spoken about billing in my life. And I had the lead with Percy, and the billboard was there, and it had Percy Seif, Yvonne Bryson in big letters, and then the rest of the cast. And my name was alphabetically Wilson Does. I went to Brian, I said, "Hey, Brian," and I got on terribly well with the man because of his sense of humor. I said, "Hey, Brian," I said, "this is not cool. This is not right. It's not right. I should be billed. I don't want to be billed above Percy or Yvonne, but it should be Percy, Yvonne, and me, and then the rest." I said, "Brian, if it's like that, take me off the billboard," and he did. So I did Occupations, and I played the lead, and Brian took me off the billboard. No, he was tougher than you think he is. He was very good at his job, but he had this. The aura was the gentle teddy bear almost. Brian Asprey was the artistic director of the Space. He called the shots. He did call the shots, let me tell you. But he referred a lot of stuff to a lot of people around him. I think he discussed a lot of stuff with Yvonne, and she was enormously helpful. I think the two of them worked together a lot. I think he asked Athol a lot of stuff. There were other important people that he would refer important decisions to. He wasn't afraid to take another man's opinion, but he was head of the Space, and that's the best job he could have had in the country, in the world at that particular time. Yvonne Bryson was the Space. And the Space would not have existed without Yvonne. It couldn't have worked without her. She was an energy. She was a focus. She was. You needed to, when you went to the Space, you wanted to see Yvonne, not only on the stage, but she wanted her to be around. She made you feel safe in a very dangerous space. No question. No, there was something very, very special there. No, she related to him as a director, and his relationship with her as an actress was totally unique. They fed off each other, and she contributed enormously to his writing. There's no question, and she grew as an actress. When he directed her, there's just no question. Their Busman and Lena, when she played Lena and he was Busman, was something to behold. It was very honest work done without technique. And Yvonne, without Athol, was a very special actress, but with him, there was an added dimension. There's no question. You could see it, you could smell it. Well, I spoke earlier about being at the rap party and the three of us being at that. There was a definite buzz. These guys were there. We were the guys. The people were talking about us. People were they were writing about us. They were very aware of what. And Athol was. He was bringing something to South African theatre that was totally unique, and they were absolutely aware of that. And the Performing Arts Council were doing the theatre that they were being asked to do, which was very important theatre, but in a sense conservative theatre. I mean, Chekhov, for example, they were doing Chekhov, very important, but that wasn't what the space was called. The space was alternative theatre in a sense, and it was a unique, different, and everybody knew and talked about it. You know, it's no different now. There's always the risk of burnout now as well. At the moment, there is no theatre for me. It's very difficult for me to get involved in theatre that interests me. So the route I take is I create my own theatre. So I become like a little we've got our own little production company, and we get writers to work for myself and my wife, and we go to festivals. Theatre is different, but we work extremely hard, and we have to work fast, and we have to work long hours. So the same risk of burnout exists now. We haven't got even the space. You had a dressing room, you had a mirror, you know, there was a dignity about walking in there. Now you're working in church halls and school halls, and very often there isn't a mirror and there's no place to hang your costume. It's things haven't got worse, things have got different. The theatre at the moment is different, but we are working just as hard with the same degree of intensity, the same degree of, in a sense, desperation as to having to pay your bills. It's not easy being an actor, but the work is as dangerous as you choose to make it. So things haven't changed. I was working in special times with special people, and we were doing special work, good or bad. It was a wonderful time of my life. But a lot has happened since then. You know, it's 40, 50 years ago. I've now been married for 35 years. I have 2 children. I'm still an actor, and I've always stayed an actor. Not for one day have I gone out and sold ties. I've stayed an actor, and it hasn't been easy. It was tough then, it's tough now, and I think it always will be tough, and that's part of the charm of being an actor. No, I mean, I think very clearly the actor is out there he's out there to watch what's happening in society and to talk about it. He's a storyteller, but he must choose to tell important stories. And there's a point where you do have a choice. You can get offered this and you can get offered that. You have to make a choice. I like to tell. I love telling stories, but I want those stories to be relevant and important. And they can be funny, they can be sad, they can be a multitude of things. But tell stories and tell important stories.